Welcome to the Backlash at Backlash.com. My name is Rod Van Mecklin, and in this video I'm going to read from my 1992 article, The Myth of Female Moral Superiority. The full article is linked below. During the past few weeks, I've listened to videos from Turd Flinging Monkey and Stardust in which they discussed a subject that 20-odd years ago, in a less developed and more preliminary way, I called the cycle of sexism. I'm sure others have discussed this too, and maybe the MGTOW community would find it useful to know what led to the ascent of women in Western society. Centuries ago, Europeans believed women were morally inferior to men. During the Crusades, however, bards brought back Muslim ideals about feminine virtue, and within less than half a century, according to Ray Tannehill, disregarded woman had been transformed into honored lady. Ultimately, this led men to educate, elevate, and emancipate women, and finally, to surrender male morality on the altar of the myth of female moral superiority. 1992, Bellevue, Washington. Most men know women are their moral superiors. Our myths, upbringing, and feminists instill this widely held, though false, belief. The idea women are morally superior to men is rooted in the age of chivalry, when bards and poets hiked their cloaks free of the muck and mud of mundane reality to portray women as beings of untouchable purity, for whose beauty a man might live to die. But until the Victorian era, most took this idea of courtly love more as a popular myth, a fine aspiration rather than fact. The Victorian era changed that. The Victorian ascent of women portrayed them as too pure and decent to enjoy sex, since their husbands' sexual appetites were the result of men's natural moral inferiority. The men could discreetly seek release for their base and vulgar lust in the arms of prostitutes, and thereby relieving their wives of this onerous task. It was a convenient contrivance that protected proper women from the ravages of frequent childbearing. But one unfortunate result of this division of labor was the quick and dirty spread of venereal disease. Another, which followed us into this century, both the 20th and 21st, is the myth of female moral superiority. But female morality derives and depends upon male morality. The purpose of morality is to provide a framework for optimum human survival. What behaviors will optimize human survival? How can we best survive as human beings? In this respect, morality is not entirely absolute. Behaviors that promote survival in rainy Seattle, for example, would probably not work very well in the dry Sahara Desert. The standard of morality, however, is absolute and immutable, long-term human survival. Not fully long-term optimum human survival. Not fully understanding this, Carol Gilligan, author of In a Different Voice, a widely regarded second-wave feminist book on the differences between male and female morality, distinguishes between the two without recognizing that the female concept of morality is only a component of a broader concept of morality she identifies as distinctly masculine. Quote, "The moral imperative that emerges repeatedly in interviews with women is an injunction to care, a responsibility to discern and to alleviate the real and recognizable trouble of this world. For men, the moral imperative appears rather as an injunction to respect the rights of others and thus to protect from interference the rights to life and self-fulfillment." Close quote. Carol Gilligan in a Different Voice. What she ignores is that this female morality evolved within the context of dependence on male protection, while male morality formed within the larger context of protecting women and children through the enforcement of rights. The purpose of male morality. Men apply the rule of law, the morality of rights, to provide a relatively safe and stable environment for women and children. This contrasts radically with female morality, which, according to Gilligan, is, quote, tied to feelings of empathy and compassion, close quote. Where survival is dependent upon action and by our actions we are expected to sustain others, a morality of rights is essential. But where survival requires dependence upon others, the moral traditions would be necessarily different. Shaped by thousands of years of dependence upon the actions of men for their survival, The ethic of care Gilligan attributes to women leads to a morality unsuited to sustain civilization in isolation from the ethic of rights she attributes to men. Vaguely perceiving this, Gilligan surmises that the two disparate concepts are complementary rather than competitive. But her analysis breaks down in that she fails to recognize this female morality is a morality of dependence, a dependent subset of male morality, and that it cannot be sustained outside the sphere of the male morality of rights. Feminists just don't get that. They don't get that the intimate connection between life and work, they don't understand the intimate connection between life and work, morality and mortality, sanctions and survival. For them, life happens. Quote, the men's role that feminists seek is not the real role of men, but the male role of the Marxist dream in which society does the work, close quote. George Gilder, Men and Marriage. The reality of civilized life is that we must exchange creativity and productivity, goods and services, to survive and sustain human life. Recognizing and enforcing property rights and the responsibilities that go with them promotes this process of exchange, nurtures civilization, and thereby optimizes human survival. In a state grounded solely on the female ethic of care, this process breaks down and civilization ends. By itself, the female ethic of care is the ethic of the wandering Stone Age band. Only the male ethic of rights and the female ethic of care together can sustain civilization. 2015, Olympia, Washington. I've heard a few MGTOW use the term going galt, a term long familiar to libertarians, and which I'm sure most of you know comes from Ayn Rand's great novel, Atlas Shrugged. By the way, Atlas Shrugged is now available as a trilogy of not terrible movies. They did a pretty good job, but in fairness, to do the novel justice would require a mini-series. And the producers did a credible job of reducing it to a trilogy, but it's unsatisfying for those of us who long know and love the book. The story revolves around the concept of productive people revoking the sanction of the victim and refusing to support a parasitic system that essentially turns them into slaves. Increasingly, this is the state in which men in Western society find themselves. It's no wonder that black men in America feel as if they've been reduced once more to slaves, but they are intentionally misled by leftists whose propaganda persuades them the cause is racism rather than sexism. So we see Black Lives Matter demonstrations when, if they were to target the real source of their troubles, they would be inviting us to join them in Men's Lives Matter demonstrations. The myth of female moral superiority is a part of the means by which men have been and are being subjugated to the state. There are many others, but to counter this one, we must take back the moral high ground. One way to do that is to be ready to respond to feminist attacks with their own weapons. For example, be prepared to respond to feminist criticisms of men with accusations of your own, such as, "What a sexist thing to say," or simply, "That's sexist." They dominated us because we let them. MGTOW is the long-term solution, but in the short term, you want more than one means of defense in your arsenal. That's all for now. Check out the other videos, subscribe to the channel. For the Backlash at backlash.com, my name is Rod Van Mecklin.